Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our latest edition of St. Paul's Clergy Conversations. My name is the Reverend Dan Klein, the Associate Rector here, and I'd like to introduce you to some familiar faces here at St. Paul's. Wilson Brown, who is, I believe, the chair of the Planned Giving Committee, and also Pat Voigt, who is a part of the Planned Giving Committee. And we're going to be showing a video interview that our interim rector, Canon Albert Ogle, did with Pat for the first part. And then the second part, we're going to be available to answer any questions. And so here we go.
So good morning, everybody. Welcome to our clergy conversations at St. Paul's in Chestnut Hill. And it is a great honor today to have Pat Voigt, who is a very long-standing member. And I've been wanting to get Pat in front of the camera for months now because I've been really inspired about your ministry. And I know that that cross that is the highest cross, the shadow, goes over the city of Philadelphia, and how much you and your late husband Fred, you cared for the city deeply. And Pat is going to be talking about our Legacy Society, the Company of Angels. But I wanted her to give you a little sense of who Pat is by talking about the work that you've been doing with the Catholic schools in the Archdiocese, working in inner city communities and suburban cities, especially with COVID-19. So Pat, welcome, and just tell us a little bit about how did this job come up and what is it you've been doing?
Thank you, Albert. Well, I have been consulting for schools for many years, and I had this opportunity to work with the Archdiocese of Philadelphia on helping all of their schools, 7 of which are in the inner city of Philadelphia. There are 17 archdiocesan high schools which fall under the auspices of the Catholic Church, and the organization that I'm working for, called Faith in the Future, oversees all the academics, the organizational aspects of all these schools, and my role is to help them raise money, to fundraise, really to strengthen each school's philanthropic efforts, to make each school successful, and also to help strengthen the overall central system. It's challenging, it's exciting. It has been very difficult during COVID. We have kept going with a hybrid school model, but I will tell you what's heartbreaking to me is that many of the students in the inner city have not been able to attend school at all this year. And in the poorest neighborhoods of Philadelphia, they have transportation issues, or they're afraid to take SEPTA. They are caring for younger siblings at home, and many of them are in areas where there's been a lot of gun violence. So our students have experienced enormous difficulties this year. To alleviate that, we're sponsoring some summer programs that will give them additional basic skills academically, but also social skills and experiences in the community, field trips, and also a lot of counseling support, mental health, addressing their mental health. So I am very proud of the work that we've done with these schools, and it's really a great honor to be helping them with the fundraising.
That's an amazing story. And your spiritual engine is St. Paul's. So tell us about how you came here and the different ministries that you're currently involved in.
Well, I've been a member of St. Paul's, I think, since the early days of my marriage. Fred and I were married for 50 years and were members of St. Paul's nearly all of that time, and lived in Philadelphia all that time. I worked for so many independent schools for 25 years at Springside, now Springside Chestnut Hill Academy, as Director of Development and Admissions. And I left in 2004 to do consulting work for other independent schools. So after that, I worked with somewhere between 35 and 40 different independent schools, and mostly in the greater Philadelphia area. And many of those were Catholic schools. So I experienced the strong faith connection that developed in those cultures of Catholic schools, and that was impressive to me. It was just a wonderful experience to know the kids had that groundedness and that they started every meeting with a prayer and every class with a prayer, and that was part of what I believed very strongly. Fred and I, raised our children here. They went all through Sunday school. My ministry here has been mainly spiritual through the healing ministry and serving as a Eucharistic minister. I've been on the vestry twice. Fred was head of the Sunday school at one point. But it's part of our being. St. Paul's has always meant a great deal to us. Our children were married here, baptized here, and it's just part of our history.
It's wonderful.
And we love it.
Yeah, it's great.
Through many rectors, maybe 5 or 6.
Wow, and a new one coming.
And a new one.
Coming. So we've been working hard. I know you're part of the Company of Angels, and about a fifth of our budget, we depend on the gifts from the past to keep going all of the programs that we're doing here. So how did you get involved in the Society of Angels? Tell us a little bit more about that background.
Well, long ago, actually, I think it was during the last campaign when we were doing a lot of renovation of the church, and it was in the early days of Cliff's ministry. I guess I've been on the stewardship committee about 10 times, but this particular campaign was the largest fundraising effort St. Paul's had undertaken. And George Reith and I co-chaired it. And one thing that George and I believed strongly was that we had not done enough work on asking people to make a bequest in their will to St. Paul's. And I knew there were many wealthy elderly parishioners who would, had they been asked, given significant gifts to St. Paul's. And some did without being asked, and we are the beneficiaries of that. But at that point, we created this organization called In the Company of Angels. I think it's a scripture reference. I don't know the exact origin of it. But it has to do, of course, with all the angels in our church. And just thinking about the afterlife and the fact that your gift will mean so much to those who come after you. It's so easy to do that. And we don't really often enough say to people, will you consider this? Will you consider making a bequest, which is not something out of your pocket or your income, but it's something you can do for others for the future.
Mm-hmm. And I was sitting, we had evensong on Sunday evening, and I got the congregation to look up at the angels and to say, 100 years ago, the people who sat where you are, that you're enjoying this great building, that they gave generously, like playing it forward,
Right.
and encourage people to check out In the Company of Angels and to think about. So what are the kinds of ways, if somebody said to you, Pat, I want to give something, I want to remember St. Paul's, what are the kinds of gifts, the kinds of opportunities that people have that they may not be aware of?
Well, there are many ways, of course, to give during your lifetime. And some people have set up trusts and estate gifts, charitable bequests. It's very easy to give a life insurance policy or a portion of your IRA, which everyone over 70 and a half is required to do.
So you can just simply
Transfer
inform
that
your
over.
accountant to transfer it to St.
Right.
Paul's, and you get a tax advantage in that, I assume.
Absolutely. It's all a charitable donation. I will tell you how I came to make a bequest to St. Paul's, and this was not too long ago. It was my 50th college reunion. And I said to Fred, I really want to do something significant while I was chairing this reunion. And I I loved this college and I wanted to do something more substantial. And I said, you know, how can I do that through my will? And Fred, who was a lawyer, said, oh, I don't know. We wrote that will when the kids were little, tiny, but call this guy at Montgomery McCracken, Paul Hines, and I did. And he said, oh, Pat, this is so easy. It's all online. All you have to do is come into my office and sign it and put a sentence in there. So I wrote in 2 sentences. I wrote a request to my college, and I wrote a request to put a bequest to St. Paul's in there. And I had no idea that it really would mean very much, but all of a sudden the college was celebrating and having, you know, meetings with people who had left something in their estate. And I am so glad that this effort has been renewed at St. Paul's, because I think it's probably one of the easiest ways to give. There are many, many ways you can give in your lifetime, but this is something that is so simple to do and requires no additions to your will. It's just very easy to do. And I think it's a wonderful feeling to know that, you know, the next vestry and the next group of people who are handling the finances of the church will always have this income from endowment. So 90% of all planned gifts are usually bequests. And there are other fancy ways to do this, and I know that your lawyer can advise you. And when I tell people to talk to their own financial advisors, that I am not an expert financial advisor, but that it is really simple and easy to do.
Mm-hmm. And we have, you know, part of our investment strategy, we have an investment committee that's a subcommittee of the finance committee. So we have people, this is their world. We have Glenn Mead, they're prepared to come in and talk to members of our congregation about the different ways in which they can support the church. What is a charitable, there's a charitable trust, charitable
There's a
remainder.
lead trust and a remainder trust.
Yeah, can you tell us a little bit about those?
Yeah, a lead trust is when you make a gift now that the church would get a certain portion of your estate, and a remainder trust is that after you're deceased, the church will get that, what is left of your estate, after you have taken care of your family and your children and everyone who matters to you. But if you wanted to make a charitable gift now, that would be a lead charitable trust.
Mm-hmm. So what about,
yeah,
there's one other, it's interesting, this idea that you can actually, if you are on a fixed income, if you're dependent on investments, right? So I can't give that up now, but there's an arrangement where you can actually donate or give money to St. Paul's and still have income, and then when you're dead, that all of the remainder can go. What is that called?
That's an annuity.
An annuity.
So that would be the endowment committee, or Glenn Mead would handle whatever comes in if you make an annuity gift, and the interest that earns will be given to you during your lifetime. And it's usually a pretty high rate, either 8 or 9%. So some people think that's a great way to make a gift and also continue to create income during their lifetime. I'll tell you a really funny story. I was working on a campaign for the Agnes Irwin School, which is an old, venerable girls' school on the main line. And there were 2 women who, upon the occasion of their 50th reunion, decided that they would have every single person in their class make a planned gift. And there were lots of those annuity gifts. Some people gave paintings and valuable jewelry and things like that. But most of those were bequests. And they started this bequest society, and this was years ago. One of them was the president of Bryn Mawr College, Pat McPherson, and her best friend and kindergarten classmate. And by the time I got there to run this campaign, which was about 6 years ago, there were 250 women who had made bequests to Agnes Irwin. And during the course of the campaign, $6 million in bequests was realized. So it sometimes takes time for all this to come to fruition, and you don't even know sometimes the people have made a request, but it's really wise for us to be doing this, to be announcing it, to spreading the word about the Company of Angels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we have about 50 people, families
Wonderful.
that are part of this Company of Angels, and we're having this event on June 13th, which is going to be our first kind of COVID special celebration to thank them. And we have this wonderful brochure that has been put together by the committee. And what I love about this, there's a very old stole that I found in the vestry, and it was falling apart. And Carol Shepherd, it's all this beautiful gold thread, and it's this angel with a trumpet. And so we're seeing that as maybe this is our special stole for the induction of members of the Company of Angels, that we keep that as a special St. Paul's kind of a special recognition of these people.
We should have a token. Most bequest societies have a little pin that you can wear, and we've done that before for parishioners on other occasions. So I think we should give people in the bequest society a little lapel pin that they can wear. This is beautiful. It reminds me of the Christmas pageant.
That's great. So the other thing is, we have many younger families in our congregation. This is not something that only older people, those of us who are about to retire, should be thinking about. We had a recent tragedy where a young father died suddenly, and 2 children, no plans, no will, and so it means that all of those decisions need to go into the family decision, right? And so what would be your advice to, say, a couple in their 30s and 40s with your story with Fred, and you had those little kids? What's your advice to them?
Well, that's when people usually are thinking about making a will, because you want to know if something happens to you, how the children will be raised, who will be their guardians, and what your estate would be if you were both suddenly killed or something happened that was dramatic in the family. So it's a good time in your 20s and 30s and 40s to be thinking about, what you might like to leave as a legacy. At the same time, taking care of your family, but other assets that you might have could be part of your will and could be a portion of which designated to the Legacy Society.
That's wonderful.
Or at least you can think about giving at least what you give now, and that's another way to look at it. If you are making a pledge to the church of a certain amount per month or per week, you want that to continue. So it's another way to think about it, that you can preserve that for future donations.
So I want to go back to that image of the cross. We have the highest cross in the city. It sits on this hill, and I'm very aware of the responsibility that means. And so this is obviously people like you and Fred and others, many members of the committee, Wilson Brown, servant leaders who love Philadelphia and are serving this community. So in summary, what do you think the mission of St. Paul's is as a Christian, as an Episcopalian, and how you're living out? What do you think this work is blessing?
Well, I think we have always felt a deep commitment at St. Paul's to helping others in the community that are not as blessed as we are. And we are well aware of living in a very affluent community. But I think it's deeply embedded in us that we need to serve our neighbors and those, especially in the immediate neighborhoods, such as the work we do with Face to Face, what the outreach committee does, and what we do to help the poor and the homeless in Philadelphia. we have always believed that is a part of our life. And Fred was all about good government and fairness and, elections. And I was always about helping people be altruistic and learn to give, to develop a culture of philanthropy. And I do think that St. Paul's has a culture of philanthropy, that it has been long-standing, and that we have had many members of this parish who have demonstrated great generosity. And you can see now the work that's being done here, to renovate the kitchen and Dixon House. We've worked on the roof, we've worked on the stained glass windows, we've worked on the sewer. But to me, the heart of our mission is helping the poor and helping those around us. And we live surrounded by very poor neighborhoods, which I'm so aware of in my work in the schools. And I think that's deeply a part, ingrained in us as a parish, that we have to do that we are so blessed to have this beautiful church, but there are so many others who are in deep need. So it is part of this parish, and it's what I love about it. The whole rummage sale effort, the most amazing thing that happens here in normal years, is all about outreach and helping the poor.
So you get a chance to meet the new rector at some point in the next couple of weeks,
Yes.
right? So what is it you want to say to that person? We don't know who that is yet, but
Yeah.
but clearly it's the clergy who are passing through, right? So what is it that you would like to say to make sure that that tradition that you've just described continues?
Oh, that's a hard question, Albert. And I think I've been here through 5 or 6 rectors, starting with Tom Edwards. And we will certainly miss you. I will too. I think it's just that it is a warm, welcoming parish, that there are so many people who are excited at this opportunity to have an exciting start. I think this person will have the opportunity to welcome in many new members and be grateful that we have attracted so many young people to this church, which bodes really well for the future.
Pat, thank you so much for
Thank
all you are and all you're doing.
No, it's a great joy to be part of this congregation.
And now we're going to open the conversation through the magic of Zoom. I'm sure you're very familiar
Questions?
with Zoom, for other people to join our conversation. So thank you again.
That's great.
I don't know how I can top Pat, so I'm not going to try. She did just a marvelous job of laying out what our committee is about and what our objectives are. I would add one footnote to what Pat said. It's never too late to review your estate plan. This engagement that I took on to help with planned giving got me to look at the estate plan that Ann and I made now about 38 years ago, when our kids were little and we were trying to be sure we had something in place in case the worst happened. And it's way out of date, and it needs to be updated. And not because the gifts are wrong or the gifts are incorrect or the division is right. It's because there's so many other things in the world we care about that aren't addressed in that document. St. Paul's, fortunately, is not one of them, but there clearly is something more we can do for St. Paul's now than we could 38 or 40 years ago. And that's one of the things among many we want to think about. But I encourage everybody, whether you're young or old, to take a look at your estate plan. This is a good excuse to go look at it. Talk to your attorney if you have one. There are many simple things you can do to help St. Paul's in an estate plan or even without an estate plan. If you have an IRA, for instance, Pat alluded to this, but if you have an individual retirement account, you can name the church or other charities as beneficiaries of that account. And that gives you a chance not only to provide for your heirs, but also to provide for the church. And the effect of that is that the withdrawals that go to the church will not be taxed. There will be no tax imposed on that. No income tax will be due from you or your heirs on that distribution. And that's a sizable tax advantage given the current individual tax rates we've got. So that's just one other thing that people can think about in terms of giving. But the main message I want to deliver on top of what Pat has said is that do give some thought to your estate plan and do consider St. Paul's. It's a great way to build, as Albert pointed out a couple of weeks ago in discussing this. These gifts are foundational for the church. They are bedrock for the church. And with these gifts, there is so much more the church can do than it can do based on simple annual giving. So see if you can find a way to remember St. Paul's in your will or in your giving plan. It will mean a lot, not only to you, I hope, but also to the church. I wanted to know, to open the floor to questions. If you're on mute, please unmute yourself. But Pat and I would be happy to answer any questions we can answer, and also to, explore any topics that you'd like to know more about.
I have the theater person's question for Pat. What was it like watching yourself for 22 minutes?
It's agonizing.
You were terrific.
I have this waddle under my neck and the camera angle was terrible. So that was what struck me at first. Oh, I looked terrible. But Albert was so gracious, and he's a very good interviewer, and he made it comfortable and easy. So, and Clark, you've done all this for so many years. It just comes naturally to talk to people about this topic. And I love having people think about exciting ways to give other than just in the collection plate every week. This is huge for the church, and we should have realized some really significant bequests by now. And out of a lack of effort, we really haven't had a huge buildup of our endowment. And I think that's critical.
Pat, could I ask you something? Given your very long history of development and particularly planned giving everywhere, not just at St. Paul's over several decades, how do you reflect on the changes in society generally? And I'm thinking mostly about increased mobility. I mean, this is perfectly clear to me at St. Paul's. What we're looking at is very different from how it was when James and I first came here 40 plus years ago, in that families arrive and spend 5 or 10 years and then they leave usually. And this is particularly true for young families, but not only. I don't want to call it a revolving door because that sounds negative, but the fact of the matter is, and we have no control over it, is that people move. They arrive and they move on. And so the sort of idea of a family who's been here for generations and the legacy part of it seems to me more difficult to message because 50-year-olds who move on somewhere else are probably going to get connected to another church, and St. Paul's will drop away from their hearts, if you like. And I'm just wondering how do you deal with that kind of a challenge? Do you think how can we deal with this?
Well, I do think that we have a lot of new young members, as I alluded to, and that's been through a conscious effort, and it's been through enthusiasm on the part of those young people. The 9 o'clock service is probably better attended than the 8 or the 11. And many of my children's friends are now attending St. Paul's, who were not even here as children, but as adults are wanting their children to have a Christian education. I think, Arabella, a lot will depend on our new rector and the enthusiasm that may bring. It always does. A new rector is great cause for celebration and a chance to meet a lot of people. I hope that person will be out meeting people in their own homes, and will meet their children. And this is how it was for Fred and I. He started taking the kids to a Tuesday morning service. Were you part of that, Clark? It was 7 a.m. on Tuesday morning.
Jim Moody started that.
Right. And they were the only two children in the group. And I think they were about 5 and 4 and 6. And Fred insisted they go. To this day, they still complain about having to get up that early and go to church before school. But the thing that really upset me was that Jim Moody would not allow them to take communion. And everyone in this small group, it was about 8 or 10 people, celebrated communion. And Carrie and Sarah were not allowed because they were too young in the days where we waited till confirmation to give people communion. So Fred and I invited Jim Moody to come to our house and meet with the children and talk to them about what this meant to them. And I think it made a big impression on them that they were granted permission to take communion, and that it was a special, special thing for them. Now, not right now, neither of them go to church on any kind of a regular basis. I always ask Carrie, but she, they're busy. They're so busy. And the thing that interferes is sports and a million jillion activities that, they have. But I think we do need to focus on this next generation, Arabella, because many of us will not be around a whole lot longer.
Absolutely. But I guess my question is, it's great to see the buildup of young families in the church and working on them for annual stewardship, annual giving. But how does this idea, the specific idea of legacy giving, of putting something in your will or making other financial arrangements that sort of are more in perpetuity, or long term anyway, how does that work when your families, your congregation may be more transient? And I don't mean really transient, but I mean, moving through. How I will share a particular thought of mine, which is that St. Paul's really, as well as working on bringing in young families, really could be working on bringing in, I call them retirees, but people who are sort of in their 50s and 60s, whatever they're doing at the time, because it seems to me we are seeing a number of people moving in at that age. And again, it's because of increased mobility. Some people are moving to this area because they have, children and grandchildren here, and they're putting down their sort of roots for the last time in Chestnut Hill or nearby. And that's a population that we should really be looking to bring in. And I say that, because very frankly, I think those are the people who are more likely to be remembering us in their wills than the 40-year-olds and the 20-year-olds.
I agree, but that really falls back to the stewardship committee. Maybe George can speak to that. We are trying to spread the word. I think, and Arabella, from your fundraising days, that it's person by person. We have to ask people.
Well, I think all of these points, I think, Arabella, you make an excellent point. And certainly if you look at the members of the Company of Angels, it tends to be an older group because they're people who are settled in. But I think we've also seen, Albert mentioned in the video that occasionally younger people encounter problems in life, and I guess we've seen that everybody needs a will. So I guess part of what we're also saying with younger people is you may in fact move on, you may in fact change your will, but for now, if St. Paul's is one of your important institutions, then now's the time to put St. Paul's in your will. And so I think that's, we can't bind them to it in the long run. They can always change their mind if they move out of state. But I think it just, the fact that, and I think in Wilson's comments at the beginning of this, of the open mic section were very solid, that, we all need to be always looking at our wills to figure out, okay, what are we including? And how do we make sure? I will confess that in my will, I've had for a number of years something I invented, which I don't know whether everybody else has this too, which is I said to my executor in the will, I say, pick the 3 charities that are of most importance to me at the time of my death. And so my executor, being my sister, would know full well that if I were to peel off tonight, St. Paul's would be one of those 3. I mean, there's no question. So, that was sort of my way of dealing with the transitional aspect of things, moving back from New York, et cetera. I rely on the fact that my sister is actively involved with my life and would be, select well. So.
Well, here's
I
another
just
thing.
want to make one other suggestion, and then I'm going to run off and hopefully get to church. I was very struck quite a few years ago. Louise and Bill Thompson attended a retirement planning seminar that was run through St. Paul's. And this was long before they retired, but it was time to be thinking about it all. And she was extremely, they were very impacted by it and made all kinds of plans and got things in their affairs in order and so on. And I really think that we should be doing that on a regular basis, retirement planning, legacy planning, all of those kinds of things. I mean, if we had once a year and it was just very convenient and easy and of course free to come, and it might not draw 50 people, but it would probably draw 8. And that's what we need, just to be doing it on a regular basis. And believe me, it could be really, really useful to some people.
Yeah, I second that. I think that's would be really valuable, really important. And not just because it helps the church, it's because the people that Arabella is describing are the people that could benefit enormously from somebody just sit down saying, here's a lot of options. Let's talk some more.
And we have that expertise from Glenmead. I've been working with the Glenmead people on a trust that was left to the Catholic schools. And it started out as a $15 million gift to the Catholic schools, and only the interest could be used on a yearly basis. So we go through a big rigmarole meeting with the executors and writing proposals and telling them what happened with the money. It's now worth 30 million. And the income is typically about 1.5 million a year. So it's in some of these cases, it can be really significant and game changing for the parish. Another thing I wanted to say was, I told you about my college. Neither Fred or I had any idea where this will was. But it's now my 55th this year, college reunion. And I have a classmate who's co-chairing it with me, who said, well, I made a bequest at the 50th, but I'm going to increase it for this reunion. So I thought, well, I better do that too. I better increase my bequest to St. Paul's as well as to Dickinson. So I'm going to do that in the next week or so. So you can change your will, and you can change the amount at any time based on your circumstances.
Well, and I just to add that, that part of what, based on what Arabella said, but this is for many people on the call right now know this, but for those who may be listening, that part of the effort of sort of re-energizing the planned giving committee, as we have been doing, is that many of these messages are familiar messages, but they just haven't been said in recent years. And so that's why this is the second of 2 clergy conversations this spring. And I think we certainly have discussed the idea of having Glenmead come in for the sort of mechanics of it in the future. So we just need to keep bringing it up and reminding people and making sure that they know that we're here and we welcome discussion, and we're happy to help with, because there have been various discussions about, there are all sorts of different ways that you can do it. If you want to get into, people can come forward and say, well, my issue is that X, and I want to make sure my child is blah, blah, blah. So there are ways to structure the giving so that it addresses your particular needs. And that's something Glenmead can help with.
And just, I don't want to push diocesan benefits too hard, but we also have a thing called the Church Foundation, which is an in-house trust company for the Diocese of Pennsylvania, and we have there a pretty full program of ways of giving, whether it's charitable gift annuities, deferred annuities, and advice, which is free to all who are members of the diocese.
Wilson, do you know the exact amount of the endowment that we've realized from planned gifts?
I don't have that figure, Pat, but we should see if we can work it up.
So I think that would be
I can tell you that I've looked at it for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's a minimal amount. In fact, I recently did a survey of 5 of the largest parishes in the diocese and asked each of those rectors how much they had received from planned giving, and they said that many of them had received very generous bequests from people who had died. None of them actually came through planned giving programs. It's hard to, yeah, it's difficult to know, but certainly if you don't make the effort. And I think going back to what Arabella was saying, that thinking of our own experience until 20 years ago, I doubt that we actually had net assets, but then gradually children grew up and stopped going to school, and there was an opportunity for a bit of cash to accrete. And we didn't really start thinking about this until we were well into our 40s and probably into our 50s, because we didn't have anything to think about. It was more, oh Lord, how do we pay the bills? It's
Exactly.
so I think you have to sort of you have to meet people where they are, and frankly, we talk about our younger members, and that's great because they are the future. But you also look at those children and you say, well, you know what? It's a dear friend of mine who's now in his 80s said, well, I can remember going to Yale and I could get a summer job and pay for the whole thing myself. Doesn't happen so much these days.
Yeah. Well, I think the message out of this is educating our younger members is a very valuable exercise, even if it doesn't realize immediate results, let's say. But reaching out to our older members is something we really need to be focused on.
So that's why I think it's so important in terms of sending out the brochures on a quarterly or semi-annual basis, that they go to everybody. I mean, I know I've been getting stuff from colleges and prep schools since I graduated, and I ignored it or didn't, depending on what I was able to do. But I think maybe we have been less attentive to the entire congregation than we should have been.
Well, Clark, that can work to our benefit in the sense that a lot of people now have much more awareness from their colleges and from their schools.
Oh, yeah.
And they have done a wonderful job of promoting this. And so it's a little easier for us to talk to people about a subject that used to be difficult to broach, I think. People don't want to talk about their death. And they don't want to talk about intimate financial matters either. Even though James is perfectly willing to say, how their life has changed. I would say the same thing for me. I wasn't in a position during our 40s to give a substantial sum, but the education that the colleges and universities and independent schools are doing around planned giving, it has really helped people to be more knowledgeable.
And we don't have to be quite as unsubtle as Kingman Brewster, the former president of Yale, was when he was asked what can somebody do for their institution, and he said, you can put us in your will and then die. I think we ought to be a little bit subtler than that.
A little bit.
But I do think there is a wonderful opportunity to reach out to younger people who are still in let's say, their financially formative or building years, and help them at least to think about planning for their own and their family's future. And to be very clear, we're not, if that resulted eventually in a gift to St. Paul's, that would be terrific. But we're really wanting to do that because it's what people should be doing for themselves. And to your point, Pat, for years I have, when I've been training people to raise money, which I've done a little bit over time, say if you sit somebody of our age down and say, look, we're going to have a conversation and you can pick one of two topics, and the topics would be your sex life or your money. Most people would be far more comfortable talking about their sex life than their money. It's just the way it is.
Well, on that happy note,
I was about to say, that's a good wrap up.
That leaves everyone speechless.
I know. Thank you.
there'll be a meeting next week of the planned sex life.
Yeah. No, it's a great topic, and it's something that we should be doing simply because it's the right thing for people to do for their families and themselves.
Agreed. Well, thank you all very much. This discussion will continue in other forums and in other ways, but I think we've got the ball rolling. So let's see if we can follow through. Thank you all.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Wilson.
Wilson, and thank you, Pat. You were brilliant on television.
Oh, please.
And having two of you for 22 minutes, that was a real blessing.
Okay, thank you all for listening
Thanks,
to all that stuff.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.